Alright everybody, welcome back. The A-18 Hornet, one of the most famous aircraft in the world, thank you Top Gun, and the last of the US 4th Gen aircraft that are going to be added to War Thunder. And also the next of my What to Expect series, following the Chinese flankers. It's been a while, hasn't it? In this case, we had a reliable leak list a few months ago showing the Swiss F-18C in the works, and now, quote-unquote, multiple F-18Cs are coming as well. By the way, I will be dropping the A and just referring to the plane as F-18 for most of the video. The plane is almost certainly coming in this December update, though it wasn't in the first leak list. However, this was said, and it's incredibly likely that it's going to be in the updated list. With this, it will be coming to at minimum 2, likely 3, and possibly even more nations. I will be mostly focusing on the F-18 in American service as they are the main user, but I will be mentioning other likely Hornets to be coming as well. They're fairly close in terms of capability, but where there are any major differences, we'll take a look at those too. I also, in most cases, won't be talking about specific blocks of Hornet, as they're less of a major thing compared to the F-16, and it's unlikely that Gaijin will make a big deal out of them. To start off with, we have the A-18A, which I fully expected to be skipped, and which the leak list also lists as being skipped. Now, before y'all rip me a new one, please hear me out. It's important to keep in mind that at this stage of development, the F-18 was not intended to be the frontline fighter of the US Navy. It was intended to be a cheaper, reliable multi-role fighter with the main goal of replacing the aging A6 and A7 fleets while still being capable of defending itself. The F-18 was actually spawned from the F-16 program in the form of the competing YF-17. The Navy saw something it liked and refined it into the Hornet. As air-to-air wasn't the main priority, this results in a bit of lackluster armament compared to the F-14, at least for air-to-air, topping out at only 4 Sparrows and only be able to bring 6 missiles if it did do so, at least in its initial configuration, and I'll get to that here in a little bit. It could carry 8 missiles, but if it did so, it could only bring 2 Sparrows, as the winged Sparrow pylons would be occupied by double Sidewinder launchers instead. You might be noticing something lacking, and that's the biggest point here. The F-18A was not capable of using any active radar homing missiles, the key thing in the top tier meta right now. In exchange, compared to the F-14, it gained access to the Maverick, the Harm, Walleyes, including data link ones, and even Rockeyes. Remember, at this stage, the F-14 didn't have the laser-guided bombs that you see on the F-14B in-game. Those came in the 90s. So the attack capability was a big step forward, at least in terms of fighters for the Navy. Long story short, while the F-18A certainly is capable of air-to-air combat, it didn't exactly excel in the flight performance department, nor did it carry a particularly impressive set of missiles. Thus, the A would likely struggle against many of the other early 4th gens already in the game. If Gaijin were to add it today as a near top-tier jet, it would probably be dead on arrival. Sure, it would be fine at 12.7 or 13.0 depending on what Sidewinders they gave it, but it wouldn't be anything special, and obviously Gaijin wants something special for their December update. The FA-18B is simply a 2-seat F-18A, and the only difference is in the position of the avionics and a reduction in fuel capacity. Otherwise, it's a completely combat-effective aircraft, though intended for training. If this were to come to War Thunder, it would likely be an event vehicle or the like, though, like the F-18A, I really doubt it's going to come at this point. This brings us to the FA-18A+, which was essentially F-18As that were upgraded at the C standard of avionics and weaponry, so of course it does get a new and improved radar. It was also granted the ability in the 90s to run 6 Sparrows, but the bigger thing was the fact that at this stage it gained access to that insane 10 AMRAAM loadout that everyone knows and loves from the Hornet. This is also where I was first able to find proof that it could use the paveways, though I expect that the F-18A likely could as well. Unfortunately, these would be the weakest of the new F-18s if we do get them, as the engines, unfortunately, were not updated. If Gaijin does decide to add this, I could see it being added as, say for example, the Sparrow F-18, despite being intended to use AMRAAM, or perhaps in the further future as the early AMRAAM F-18 Premium, for example with a Top Gun skin. It would be similar to our F-15A, which technically was upgraded with flares and the new radar to use AMRAAM in the 90s, but it works great as the Sparrow Eagle. Potentially, if they wanted to differentiate it while still leaving it with Sparrows, it could be added with the AIM-7P, which adds inertial navigation and data link to the Sparrow, similar to the R-27ER. This is also where we find a couple of the potential additions to other trees as well, such as the UK. They could potentially get either the F-18A Hug from Australia or the CF-118 from Canada. Both, unfortunately, have the same weak engines, though both were also upgraded with AMRAAMs just like the F-18A+, which is why I decided to include them here. Now, if Gaijin decides to add a Hornet to the UK, it'll be one of these two. If they do, personally I hope it's the Australian one, as it has one of the more unique weapons kits. They actually tested the Python 4 on it, and eventually they installed the ASRAAM as their next generation IR missile. War Thunder has no place for ASRAAM at the moment, but it would be an interesting addition in the future if they did go with that route. The Australians also use the BOL pods in the plane as well, which would give it extra countermeasures over the 120 that's standard on the F-18. Alternatively, the CF-118 will be a more conventional Hornet, with sidewinders and AMRAAM. They also recently upgraded the CF-118 with an ESO radar that could potentially be added if Gaijin decided to go this route. Finally, though this is more of a stretch, Italy potentially could gain an FA-18 Plus of their own, though they're Spanish, as they have other Spanish vehicles in their tree. Personally though, I think this is much less likely than the British options. In short, the F-18A Plus is nearly identical to the later F-18C, but it lacks the engine upgrade. Thus, this variant gets much better missiles compared to the normal A, but would be substantially worse in a dogfight than the C Hornet. I could see Gaijin adding this as either a Sparrow-only F-18 or perhaps a premium. The FA-18C was the Hornet matured into a proper fighter, being developed with the understanding that the F-14 would soon be phased out of service, and so the F-18 would have to pick up the slack. This is also almost certainly the variant that's coming next update. As previously mentioned, this would involve the addition of a new radar, the ability to carry 2 more Sparrows, and crucially, AIM-120 ability, the same as the F-18A+. There is also potential for a late United States Marine Corps F-18C, as they have recently put an ESO radar onto the F-18C, making the best Hornet for air-to-air, at least in my opinion. Now, more air-to-ground has come as well with the addition of JDAM, the Harpoon anti-ship missile, the AGM-154 joint standoff weapon, and of course, the infamous SLAM ER. Some of these could likely be used by the F-18A+, and to be honest, it likely doesn't matter, even if it can't, as these missiles are not coming to the game anytime soon. Another massive upgrade, a crucial one in War Thunder, is the greatly improved flight performance. The F-18C is only marginally heavier than the A, the sources I could find putting it around 250 kilograms heavier, while also having much greater thrust. About 20% more in fact. This is the ultimate dogfighting Hornet, though at the end of the day, it's still just a Hornet. Speaking of, now is a great time to start off with what we know for sure about its flight performance, and that is that the Hornet is slow. It has a max speed of less than Mach 2 even at altitude, and on the deck it struggles to break Mach clean. According to most of the accounts that I can find actually, once you load it up with its full load of air-to-air, it can't even break Mach on the deck anymore. Now, it may still be able to in War Thunder since Gaijin doesn't really properly model pylon drag, but is going to be slow regardless. Easily the slowest jet at top tier, and even much older 3rd gens like the F4 Phantom will easily catch it. Even if you try to put into a dive to catch somebody, the F-18 also redlines at Mach 1.2 on the deck, and that lackluster speed means that his AMRAAMs will have much less range than, say, the F-15E in space going Mach 2 while you're stuck much lower and much slower. Its sustained turn rate is fairly mediocre for top tier. The one good declassified source that I can find stating it has a sustained turn rate of 19.2 degrees per second, with only 2 sidewinders, 2 AMRAAMs, and 60% fuel, which is fine. But what really worries me is this next line right here. 54 knots per second of speed blade and instantaneous turn. That's over 100 kilometers an hour per second of speed loss, and that is with the normal G limiter on. Gaijin doesn't model G limiters in War Thunder, so you'll be pulling substantially harder than a Hornet normally would in real life. Losing 150 or possibly even 200 kilometers an hour of speed per second while throwing it into a turn is incredibly likely. High AOA, high speed bleed, and a lot of missiles? Now, I wonder what that sounds like. Yeah, I'm thinking it's going to behave like the SE-27 does in War Thunder currently, but somehow worse due to a lower thrust-to-weight ratio. Now, keep in mind there is always the chance that Gaijin could pull a Gripen and make the plane a UFO on launch and then nerf it repeatedly, But in the case of the F-18, we actually have data on how it's supposed to perform, so I really doubt that this happens. This is where we get to the two additions that I am the most confident in. The most obvious one is the Finnish F-18C, which would give a top tier to that line of Sweden as it currently ends at 11.0. It also lines up with the fact that we just got a new Rank 8 premium for Sweden as well. The Finnish F-18C would have the same loadouts for air-to-air as the US F-18C, with AMRAAM B and C and AIM-9M and X. However, unlike the American Hornet, this would have no air-to-ground capabilities, actually being renamed to simply F-18C. In 2015, however, this would be changed with their MLU-2 program, the aircraft renamed back to FA-18C as well at this time. Gaijin could go either way on this one, as they did remove bombs from the MiG-21 BIS in the finish line for historical accuracy. If they decide to do an early and late Finnish Hornet, then the first one would not have the ability to carry air-to-ground. The MLU-2 also gains BOL pods to their Hornets as well, just like the Australian Hug. The other F-18C that is very likely to come is the Swiss Hornet for Germany. This is the aircraft that was originally leaked a few months ago, though I will say I'm less confident that it's coming this update now if they really are rushing into adding Eurofighter. They may just save the plane for whenever they add the full Swiss subtree to Germany instead. If Gaijin sticks to full historical accuracy, this would be the worst Sea Hornet. Not only because it was set in the German tech tree, but also because it has no air-to-ground munitions in real life, period. Though it is unclear whether the capability itself was removed or not. It's likely that Gaijin would just give it anyways, as Germany is utterly lacking CAS at top tier, similar to how they've given the AIM-9J to the F4F and the R27ER to the MiG-29s in the German line. The Sidewinder selection would also be worse if they stuck to full historical accuracy. The correct missile for the Swiss Hornet would be an IRCCM-equipped, smokeless AIM-9P. The Swiss skip straight from the AIM-9P5 to the AIM-9X. Once again, Gaijin could simply give it the AIM-9M or the LI, but there is always the chances they won't. One interesting thing about the Swiss Hornet is that they actually use low drag pylons. If Gaijin were to properly model it, you could only carry one AMRAAM per rack on these, but you would have a much improved drag profile. Next up, we have the F-18D, which is another one of those that I doubt would actually come to the game as anything besides maybe an event vehicle or premium. Like the F-18B, this is a twin-seater, but in this case they actually adapted it to have the rear seat function as a weapons system officer in some aircraft, allowing the pilot to focus on flying instead of having to multitask while performing CAS. While practical in real life, in War Thunder, all the second seat would do is just add weight, making the F-18D a slightly heavier and thus worse F-18C. So to recap, these Hornets gain much better engines over the previous ones, having the best dogfight performance of any Hornet. This is the variant which has been leaked and fits the current top tier meta the most and is the most likely to be seen in the next update. The final Hornet is the FA-18E Super Hornet, which is so massively changed that it may as well be a different plane. In fact, the main reason this class is an F-18 at all was to fool Congress into thinking it would be a low-cost alternative to other options. Notably, it would feature reduced RCS despite its greater size, and very importantly, an ESA radar. Along with this, it gained an extra 2 pylons, which increased its cast load by adding an extra pair of multiple types of weapons, including the Maverick, Harm, Haveways, and Slam missiles. This also would bring its maximum AMRAAM load up to a whopping 12, yes, 12 AMRAAMs. This gives you a full load of 14 air-to-air missiles, and you will be needing it. Now, it does have stronger engines, but that comes at the cost of massively increased weight, resulting in the effective thrust-to-weight ratio being much lower. Now, I will preface this by saying the stats in this document I'm about to show you are estimated by the US Navy, unlike the F-18C stats that were actually properly tested. But according to this at least, the Super Hornet has worse sustained turn rate, losing 1.2 degrees per second down to 18 degrees. The much bigger red flag, however, is the speed bleed. It bleeds about 20% more speed than the Sea Hornets, all the while having much worse acceleration near sea level. This not only means that you are significantly worse in a dogfight, but if you do need to defend yourself at lower altitudes, it can turn you into a sitting duck trying to defend. What it seems like is that the Navy was optimizing the F-18E for higher altitude fights, as the document later goes on to feature improved high altitude turning compared to the sea, and the acceleration and turn difference drops the higher in altitude that you go. More BVR focused flight performance to match more BVR missiles. And speaking of, the Super Hornet, in addition to gaining the AIM-260, which is a missile intended to compete with the MDBA Meteor in the near future, now has access to the longest range air-to-air missile in the US arsenal, the absolute meme that is the AIM-174B. This is essentially a modern-day Phoenix, with the released range exceeding 240 kilometers and in all likelihood much greater than that. It can carry a maximum of 4, and to be quite honest, they should have limited use in War Thunder, as they are quite large and heavy, most likely being intended to be used against high-priority targets such as AWACS. This will be the final F-18 in War Thunder, and the E model will only be found in the US tech tree. There is, of course, an F-18F Super Hornet, which is once again a twin-seater, but this has the dual rollable training and strike. This capability is actually featured in Top Gun Maverick, and once again, although it's useful in real life, in-game it would simply be a slightly heavier version of the single-seater. The one interesting thing here is the UK could potentially get this, as Australia operates the F model. Otherwise, just like with the other twin-seat Hornets, there's really no point adding it to the game. So just to recap, with the Super Hornets you get worse dogfight performance, but improved high altitude and BVR performance, a much improved radar, and much improved loadouts, along with more missiles. That's pretty much everything when it comes to the Hornet. There's a lot to unpack there, and it was one of my most requested vehicles. The last thing I wanted to talk about was where I think it's going to go in the US tree, because that is one of the more common questions that I get. Whether it's going to go after the F-14 Tomcat or after the Attacker line. And personally, I think it's probably going to go after the F-14B. Gaijin is going to be adding the F-18C model, and that is by far the more, air-to-air focused version. So it makes sense to come after the plane that it would have replaced. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. If you did, let me know in the comments down below and hit that subscribe button, because there's going to be some more what to expect on the way in this upcoming week, most likely. If you stuck around this long, go ahead and type F-15 Eagle Supremacy in the chat down below, and I'll catch y'all next time, so peace, y'all.